The post office told every single one of us sat here today, told us over and over, you're the only one.
The ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, has rightly provoked a storm of outrage. And it's a storm that's long overdue.
Look at us. Here we all are.
I became aware of this injustice in 2010, shortly after I was elected, and I started making noise about it almost straight away.
Only one ever again.
For behind every actor's performance in this drama is a real person, a real family, a real constituent. Michael Rudkin and his wife Susan for many years ran the post office in the village of Ibstock, a village I know well, where two of my children went to nursery.
I'm going to show you how to do this.
And then, right in front of my eyes, he starts changing the sub-postmasters figures. Excuse me. I've been telling my members for years, no one else has access to their branch accounts.
Mr. Rudkin's visit to Fujitsu was a pivotal moment in both the drama and the real-life quest for the truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know what this means. It means they can sneak in behind your back, change your figures, bugger off, and leave with no trace.
Remote access. Well, that makes sense.
But it was also the moment that the Rudkins' lives really fell apart.
They said that was impossible. They said that the branch accounts were totally secure. That's what he told me.
They lied.
The version of events given here by Sean Dooley's Michael Rudkin describes exactly what happened to the real one in 2008.
So I drive home from Fujitsu. The next morning, I wake up and my wife is stood at the foot of our bed and there's an auditor beside her. Your post office is now £44,000 in deficit, says he. Coincidence?
Revenge?
My wife ran the post office when I was away on Federation business. So although I was the sub-postmaster, my poor wife is now a convicted criminal.
It was the start of a 4-year living nightmare for the Rudkins, particularly for Susan, who ran the post office day to day, and on whom suspicion and criminal charges fell.
I'm big enough and ugly enough to look after myself and have done so, but I also am very protective towards my wife at 5'2", 8 stone. Initially when this first broke, contemplated suicide. Me and my 2 sons, we had to administer the medication prescribed by a general practitioner because she could potentially have carried out that threat of taking her life, because they absolutely destroyed Susan's character and personality. She was a fun-loving, active woman, outgoing, would think nothing of jumping on a push bike and joining in with the boys, kayaking, canoeing. She used to be a horse rider. Now, as things stand, yeah, the stature's still the same, but psychologically she's not the same person. To go through that court procedure, to almost pass out in the dock, to be then told she would have a 12-month suspended sentence for 2 years. She would have a 6-month electronic tag. She would have 300 hours of community service to do. And ironically, it was in a charity shop as a cash handler. And this is a woman who's accused of stealing money.
Michael and Susan Rudkin brought their story to one of the very first surgeries I ever held following my initial election victory in 2010. I could scarcely believe what they were saying, but believe it, I did. And they now feel that constituency surgery was at least the beginning of the end of their ordeal.
Susan and I was, over that 4-year period, were full of despair and despondency. We thought our world had fallen apart. I think Andrew himself initially was quite surprised, but I was equally surprised with the speed at which Andrew then came back to me for another surgery and said, would you attend? He'd made some preliminary investigative work and found that the complaint that I was making had some justification. Suddenly to get somebody in your local MP who understood how you were feeling, but more importantly believed in you. You weren't there as somebody that was representing untruths. He could see potentially that there was some truth in the arguments that we were putting forward. He investigated them. He came back promptly and said, there is a case to be answered and I'm here to support you.
To give some background to how the Post Office have let down both the sub-postmasters and indeed members of this House throughout this process.
And it wasn't until Andrew got up in Parliament and started to make an issue out of this, and the fact that then other MPs started to think, hang on a minute, I've just had one of my constituency members complain of something similar.
Postmasters attempted to balance their accounts at the end of the day. From that period forward, there have been failing
and
after
550 of us went to court under a group litigation order, which only 1 or 2 of these is issued a year. So that gives some indication of the magnitude and the success that the pressure that our MPs, and in particular Andrew being at the forefront of this, brought about the changes that was necessary for this industry.
This has been the result of many years' work to achieve justice for over.
Before there was no
550
future.
people.
Susan and I would have been dead and buried. We'd have been just another casualty, made forced out of the industry, had our property confiscated. Having talked to Andrew, been to several of his surgeries, then there was a future. There was some prospects at the end of this, because the confiscation order the Post Office had got in place then had to be lifted and removed so that we could get on with our lives, and we've retained the property.
For many, many months, Fujitsu claimed that Mr. Rudkin had never been on the premises. I told them that Mr. Rudkin claims he signed the visitors book on that day, and helpfully Fujitsu said that they'd lost the visitors book for the day in question. Eventually, a whistleblower came forward from Fujitsu, one of the IT engineers, and he verified everything that Michael Rudkin had said.
Ron Warmington was the forensic accountant I recommended to the government to investigate with a view to administering a mediation scheme for the victims. He says the relationship that he and I built was central to his work and getting to the truth.
Andrew brought to the chamber of the House of Commons a business instinct which seemed to be lacking in so many others. He had that sort of awareness of human frailty and of wrongdoing that meant he and I were on the same wavelength. He understood what I was doing and I understood what he was asking.
The House should know that the Post Office has always maintained that it is not possible to alter accounts in a sub-post office remotely. However, recently...
What Michael was reporting was a pivotally important matter.
My member's been losing money.
Oh, the bottom line.
Me included.
Meet your friendly covert operations team.
I get in there.
It turned out to be hugely important. The whole business of Fujitsu meddling routinely, perhaps even on an industrial scale each night, altering branch accounts to correct errors that had come up through the system itself. Andrew got that, he understood that issue. He understood that when we said Of course, a company like Fujitsu is going to have a backdoor into the system, because systems, databases, do sometimes accumulate errors and they need to be corrected. Now, what we didn't know at that time, but Andrew was very, very quick on the uptake in understanding, was that not only was that likely to be happening, but it had been happening. What was worse was that, and this was completely outrageous, was that those alterations were being made without the knowledge or permission of the impacted sub-postmasters, and often using their IDs and passwords.
You're inside some sub-postmaster's horizon and he doesn't know. I said, yeah. Yeah, I am.
Now, Andrew had that sort of business acumen that he could get that straight away. And what was, in a sense, frustrating was that he would get it straight away, so would James, or for that matter, Mike would. Post office, on the other hand, would look at me as though I'd dropped down from Klingon or something like that and was talking in some foreign language. They just didn't understand it and would come up with weasel-worded answers. So when I asked the question, has Post Office or any of its subcontractors, such as Fujitsu, ever altered any branch's account without the knowledge or permission of the impacted sub-postmaster? And that's verbatim the question, verbally and put in writing. And then the answer would come back, there is no functionality in the Horizon system to remotely access branch terminals. People like Andrew and I would go into orbit because they aren't corrected through the front-end system, in this case Horizon. They are corrected with very powerful software that goes right into the database. It's a weasel-worded answer that is probably true, in fact that is true, but it's so monstrously deceptive that it's actually a lie. Now Andrew got that stuff, and God bless him for doing that, and he stuck with it. He didn't quit.
Post Office Limited then started proceedings against Mr. Rudkin's wife for theft
He
and false accounting. They also
not only
for a confiscation order
ferociously represented the Rudkins throughout, he saw the bigger picture, much bigger picture, that were many, many more people impacted, and he understood the consequences.
Why? Well, because the government...
My part has been written out of this drama. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. But what ITV have also written out is its own refusal to tell this story when the broadcaster was first told about it, by me, in 2014. Its chief executive at the time was Adam Crozier, who at the height of the scandal was in charge of Royal Mail, of which the Post Office was then part. ITV doesn't mention its old boss in the drama series either.
Paula, why don't you make those files available? What's the problem?
The only boss they talk about is Paula Venables, who replaced Crozier in 2010, after most of the Horizon damage had sadly already been done.
I wanted to get this out in the open. It was a government cover-up, and I wanted those innocent people to be vindicated. I went to the BBC, to ITV, to Sky, to Channel 4 News. I went to the Times, I went to the Telegraph, I went to the Daily Mail. I did actually get an article in the Sunday Express. Caroline Wheeler was the political editor of the Sunday Express at the time, and we did a small article about it, which is all we could get in, about this huge miscarriage of justice. Caroline subsequently moved to the Times, the Sunday Times, and I was expecting, we were all optimistic that now she was at a broadsheet newspaper, the newspaper of record, that we'd be able to expose this great injustice. But the fact is, when Caroline Wheeler went to the Sunday Times, her ability to get that story out disappeared with her move. What we're having is suppression of the media, of certain stories. Certainly for at least 5 years, I pressed the media to expose this injustice around the Horizon system and every one of them refused to ever run the story. That might strike some chords with the current mainstream media's unwillingness to report on vaccine harms, vaccine deaths, or even the excess deaths, or the WHO treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations.
You have to wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, if this organisation, the Post Office, is even aware of the misery it has caused. The fact that the
I've been on my feet in the chamber of the House of Commons for many years, talking about this toxic blend of corporate greed and governmental and regulatory bungling that led to the victimisation of thousands of innocent people.
It only serves to show to me that this organisation is not fit to conduct an inquiry into this matter. No one seems to care. I fear history will not judge this House kindly. Worse still, in a country supposedly committed to free and frank exchange of views, it appears that no one cares that no one cares. Well, I care, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And
I'm still on my feet today in that chamber. Different issue, different government, different greedy corporations, but in my view, absolutely the same dynamic.
More than 20 rejections to be allowed to raise this topic, but at last we're here to discuss the number of people dying.
The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, in Alan Bates, as in Andrew Bridgeton, came together with other fellow MPs. Those are the good men that did something. I'm extremely disappointed in government in relation to where Andrew finds himself today. To have accusations levelled against you, and I know what that's all about, when you have these false allegations levelled against you that you're misrepresenting something, when in actual fact you're not misrepresenting, you're making comparisons in terms of numbers, then it's disgraceful and shameful that this particular government, the Conservative Party, have adopted that attitude. I try not to take a political stance because I have voted for both Labour and for Conservatives. But I also believe that sometimes we have to take the politics out of this and we have to say, can I trust that man to deliver for the local community? And as is the case with Andrew Bridgeton, yes, I can trust him. And I will go on record as saying, yes, I would vote for him.
What we're seeing, even for the over 85-year-olds, according to the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities.
As to the situation with Andrew and the COVID situation and his being cast adrift by the Conservative Party and speaking to an all but empty House, I find it utterly disgraceful. Whether he's right or wrong, and I personally think he's right, but whether he's right or wrong, we, the populace, elect MPs to represent us and to debate properly, thoroughly, to the point of reaching the truth, matters of consequence. And if this is not a matter of consequence, I don't know what the hell is. The possibility, some would argue the probability, others would argue the proved certainty, that certain pharmaceutical businesses have inadequately tested stuff that we've got floating around in our bloodstream now, and that there have been excess deaths and there have been horrible health consequences for a lot of people, and that subjecting young, tiny children who wouldn't have suffered adverse consequences from COVID at all to having to be immunised or to receive jabs. Of course that should be questioned. Of course it should be debated properly by a full House. When we, the population, see the full House there to debate MPs' expenses and salaries, and 7 or 8 people to listen to Andrew, who's a highly articulate chap, I think it's utterly disgraceful. And 10 out of 10 for him, to Andrew, for sticking to his guns and, you know, what is clearly huge personal cost campaigning on this. I mean, I raise my hat to the man.
You know, we've waited so long for this day, and
it took well over a decade for ITV, the rest of the legacy media, and the government to get their act together on the subject of the Sub-postmasters Horizon scandal.
I mean, look at us. Do we look like criminals?
When it comes to vaccine harms and excess deaths, I tell you this now, we don't have a decade. Thank you very much for listening to me.